Well, thank you. I think the applause says it all. Thanks. Super discourse, and we've got a bit of time for Q&A. Perhaps I can exercise my normal host's privilege and ask the first question. Do you think the success of the legacy of Crossrail will sort of diminish people's anxieties about these sort of huge infrastructure projects? So sort of the big sewer, Crossrail 2 possibly. Because that seems to be quite an important issue, because it's not so much the engineering, so it's also persuading people that, yes, they can live with a sort of big infrastructure project.
Yeah, absolutely. I truly believe that, and you probably have heard the Chancellor a couple of days ago with his commitment and the bill, and the massive chunk of that is going to the construction industry, is going to innovation in construction. I think it's really testimony to what we have achieved, and when you fast forward, kind of, especially with projects that go over a long period of time, when you start with the planning phase early on and you say, I'm going to finish in 2018 and it's going to cost me £15 billion, and actually being just 10% away and being in exact that same position, I think is a massive testimony to all the effort and all the work that the team did. And I think this definitely will bring quite a lot of trust, not only I think in the UK, but also across the globe. So for Bechtel, we're doing work in Sydney, for example, and if you think about what we're going to do there, it's going to be a mirror to what Crossrail is in the UK. And same in the US. And I think it just gives confidence so that people are able to deliver such a huge scale projects with these amazing, huge interfaces and have the tools and techniques to be able to deliver it. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a how question. Is it possible to explain briefly the technology involved or the sat-nav you use to negotiate large TBMs underneath London?
Yeah. I must admit, I'm not totally technically proficient to answer that question in detail, but what I know is that the tunnel boring machine basically operate on a, yes, exactly as you mentioned, a very sophisticated GPS system and a laser system. And the software is preloaded with the route that it should follow, and it uses this basically a combination of monitoring equipment and a combination of satellite equipment, plus the preloaded software to exactly navigate where it actually is. And then they were steering it based, and they could very accurately steer it because it supports itself of the just panel before you move forward. So you could very accurately, just with the distance of the panel that you've installed before you, steer the direction and move forward very accurately. And then at every single point, I believe they would get feedback as to where exactly you are, and based on that, you would adjust the position and then move forward. But I think that's a bit more complicated than what I understand. So I'm more than happy to just take details and send you full information afterwards. But this is what this is the amount I know.
Someone there?
Yeah.
Good evening.
Hello.
I find your talk interesting, but I had hoped to learn a lot more about the civil engineering of the project. So I'm going to ask you two schoolboy questions.
Okay.
Where did you take all the stuff?
So there were 18,000 tons of them, and all of them got transported, the majority of it transported through the river and through trains, and all of them went to create a bird reserve in Essex. So we created a massive bird reserve area called Wallasey Island, and this is where more than 90% of the excavated material went.
You said that productivity was one area in which performance was well below world class. Would you like to expand on that and what needs to be done to raise productivity? This is a subject that applies to the whole economy, is much commented at the moment. So your perspective on your project would be very enlightening.
Yeah, I definitely mentioned it in the context of the industry overall, and I think in construction, definitely, for example, if you look at the history of manufacturing, they moved quite forward in terms of making their processes lean, eliminating waste, and improving productivity quite high in the manufacturing industry. In the construction industry, I think we're still stalling slightly behind. In terms of, I think we, just from personal experience, I think one of the major challenges that we have is the use of a kind of packaged softwares that allow us to, or integrated softwares that will allow us to have an integrated solution from design to construction to testing and commissioning. A lot of what we do, how challenging and complicated it is, a lot of it is still ran off spreadsheets, which is surprising given the scale and the complexity of what we've done. We've done, I think, quite a lot of work on Crossrail to move that forward. We have employed virtual project delivery to measure where we are in terms of procurement and how we're going to, kind of in terms of progress, where we are, the complexity of the interfaces, to think about how we're going to manage the logistics. Just you have these massive stations all shut down, and you have only one place where you can get all your material down. And you really need a sophisticated software to basically tell you what do you need to give priority to. Is it your tiling? Is it your concrete? Is it your paneling? What is it that you need to give priority to get these down? And in terms of, sorry, needs the mic again.
If you split the problems between investment and training, for example, where would you put the focus?
I would say investment would be first, personally. I think we still need to do quite a lot in investing in packages and investing in technology early on in the project. I think we did quite a lot, but it might have been a bit late. And when you're a bit far down the project, people will be very reluctant to go back and change the way they are doing things. And then just getting people to use it on site will be then quite challenging. So I think really early investment, early on, even before projects start or just at the start, just in terms of the planning, how you're going to do it, what tools you're going to use will be fundamental. And just getting the right software packages up front will be quite important.
Was there someone in the, yes, at the, oh, there are quite a few hands. Okay, so at the back, and then someone over here, and then we'll come down to the front. So Martin over there. Sorry? Yes, right at the back.
Go.
Okay, fine.
I'd like to hear a bit more detail about how you lined the tunnel at Farringdon and how it differs from the concrete spraying that was used on all the other stations.
Yeah. I'll go back to that slide, actually.
Yeah.
This one. So what you see in there is the Kern shutter. This is a 12 meters long steel shutter. It is ceramic coated so that when we actually pump the concrete and when we erect the shutter, we're able to have the finished F2 concrete finish that you have in there. And basically, we would align the shutter to the exact lining, to what we needed, with the tolerances we need. And this shutter has basically windows, opening windows, alongside it at each one of the levels. So you start your pour from low, and then it goes up, and every time the concrete rises, you would shut down your observation window and fit it with a vibration unit so that you're able to vibrate the concrete so that the gravel doesn't set basically while you're pumping it. And it's a bespoke concrete mix as well, so it's not what you would normally use typically use, so it's one that basically doesn't have it's a totally different specification. It's not the same. We refer to it as concrete gold, basically, because it's much more expensive and it's not the typical. I'm sorry?
Is that what you see on the photograph?
No, so this is every single panel on the photograph. It's probably on this side, you could see this window, small window. that is left in the concrete. You would see it on that side. Can you see that? Yeah, so this is basically one of the oblique windows that you would shut, and then it goes all the way up until the top, and then you would leave it to set for 24 hours, and then you would be ready to pull the shutter down, and then it moves on rails. So if I'm not sure, yeah, the rails are you can see the rails here in this picture. So it's like a massive transformer with arms, erected arms, stick in, pour, go back down, move in on rails, and then repeat the process again.
Okay. Can I comment that Keelan talked a lot about women in engineering, and that we haven't seen one hand from a woman yet. Okay, at the back, please.
It was very clear from your talk how much of a project management and delivery challenge Crossrail was, as well as being an engineering challenge, of course. I'm curious, particularly from a station perspective, since that's where your focus is, what about the digital technologies involved? Can you tell us a little bit about how Crossrail the use of digital technology has changed in the railway industry as a result of the Crossrail project?
Yeah. So on the projects, so throughout I think I would separate it between throughout the construction and then in terms of just handover and handing over the asset to the infrastructure maintainer. I think we've implemented quite effectively BIM modeling, or virtual project delivery, where we basically made use of the process to do asset naming and tagging and labeling. So you would know exactly for each one of the assets built on the station, you would build all its attributes together, and this is all in a packaged software that you can hand over to infrastructure maintainers, so that it facilitates basically the future operation and maintenance of the asset. We've definitely used it for training, so it's and kind of just to make sure that in both sides, during construction and then afterwards. So during construction, when you have for example, we had very complicated steel structures that needed to be built, so we did the training for operatives using these packages. And then we were able also to package some of it for training afterwards for the infrastructure maintainer afterwards. And then the other element of it is basically proving for interfacing parties and stakeholders around the stations that a complicated piece of work, for example, how it is going to be done, how it's going to be built, the interfaces with that. On Farringdon Station, for example, I'm not sure if you're familiar, we have something called an app ceiling, which is a diamond-shaped ceiling. And the longest piece of that is around 10 tons. And it had to be built just across from the Thameslink station that runs in there, so only centimeters away. So these software packages were quite fundamental to actually put to proof as to how we would build it, how we would move it and put it into site, rather than just talk theory. So it helped us with quite a lot of stakeholder involvement and assurance kind of type of way as well. Does that answer your question, or is that something else you need to talk about? Yeah? Okay.
Someone back there. Okay, right, okay.
So your talk was very interesting in demonstrating how complicated a project like this is today. So I was curious about the kind of mix now between the kind of physical elements of a project in terms of the pouring of the concrete, the boring of the tunnels and the laying of the tracks and all that kind of stuff. And then the softer elements in terms of the software with the fire alarm systems and the air conditioning and all those other things that have to be installed as well before the line can open. I was just curious about the mix between those two.
Do you mean the interface or the actual challenge and scope of that?
In terms of a kind of proportion of the project.
Proportion of the work. I think in terms of, just if I give you a scale, so Farringdon Station is £500 million. Around 100 of it is in mechanical and electrical plant. And the rest is in everything else, basically. And this includes design and testing and commissioning. In terms of mechanical and electrical plant and fire, it's a fundamental part of it because it is what makes it operational, obviously. But I think the major cost is in the civil and the tunneling element specifically. But it definitely is, it has its own complication, and we're now in the midst of installing our plant and equipment and getting it tested and getting it ready and getting it integrated with the rest of the railway systems as well. So this will take a big portion, and I think is mostly the most risky now because it transforms it from an infrastructure project to an operational railway. The other really important element of that is there is a bit of a cost involved as well, because we are in most of these stations integrating Crossrail stations with existing stations. So, for example, Farringdon Station will be integrated with the existing Farringdon London Underground station and with the Thameslink station. And when you're talking about fire systems, you then suddenly have, you need to make sure that the 3 stations are Section 12 compliant. The 3 stations have the same fire alarm system. The 3 stations share the same operation and have very similar logic in terms of evacuation and station operation, basically. So then it's a very important and very significant element of it, definitely.
Okay, please.
Hi, I work in a technical area and we really struggle to recruit women. You mentioned the measures that you were taking in Crossrail to inspire young women to come into the industry. Is there anything that actually worked in terms of employing mature women to, of any age, above school age, to come in and work on Crossrail?
I think having somebody like you in the technical area as a role model, I think, is what made a big, massive difference. So, for example, I mentioned Linda Miller, project manager, and she alone recruited. She goes on to her to people, and she's like, "What are you studying? What are you gonna do? Come in." And in terms of, I think these people just being a role model, I think made a massive difference. And because of that, the most, in terms of just a tangible tool, basically, marketing that, I think, made a difference for us on Crossrail. And I think the team did a really good job in terms of marketing and publicizing this information. And I spoke about the image and just making these changes. I think made a difference. The other thing that I think also made a difference is talking directly to schools and universities and talking to people before they actually made the decision. Because I think by the time we come to talk to girls, it's way too late. They've already decided what their degree is going to be, and they already made a difference. So with these organizations that we partnered with, we tried to talk to people before they actually went in and decided what their degree is going to be. But also in terms of retention, one of the things that I think is also quite important, because even when you get women into construction, they do a year or two and then it's like, that's it, that's not for me, I'm off. And just having this inclusive environment really helped. And then I just been on maternity leave, came back a couple of months ago. And having flexibility in the workplace so that I'm able to have a successful career and at the same time look after a 1-year-old makes a massive difference. And it's definitely one of the main reasons I'm able to do work successfully, because I'm not worried about that element of it. And a lot of women I know around me who are within the same age group, they had a career break, but all of them are coming back, and all of them came back to Crossrail. So I think having this mindset that if you're working in a construction environment, if you have the right support, the right team, you can create a workplace that is inclusive and where people are actually able to contribute is extremely important. So I think they are all very small kind of steps, there is a huge program in place, but what I truly believe makes a massive impact is these small things that will make an impact on a case-by-case basis depending on the individual's situation, whether they are a student or whether they are somebody graduating or whether they are somebody just having a career break and coming back, or whether someone who has worked for the industry for a long time. I think each one will have its own their own particular case, which has to be taken into consideration. And then we have overall, as an industry, become flexible enough and inclusive enough to be able to take each case and make it work, basically.
So there was one last question there. John?
Hello. The last time I went to a lecture on tunnelling, it was about the first tunnel under the Thames, designed by Mark Brunel, and obviously that was very different. But it did.
Yeah, I must say, I'm an electrical engineer by background.
But in some ways, obviously similar. So I have a rather schoolgirl question: is that obviously, at one point you did have to cross the Thames because you have the Southern Fringe. Were you so far down that you didn't have to pay attention to that at all?
I wouldn't say we didn't have to pay attention to that at all. No, that's definitely not. But I think we were below the tunnels who previously passed underneath the Thames in these particular locations. So the major focus was on the ground and the ground movement and the ground monitoring and the impact on the other railways, on the other rails, operational railways basically passing underneath the Thames. There was a couple of pinch points just coming out from underneath the river and coming into the riverbed, basically, where people had to put extra attention in there. But yeah, that's it's more the focus on the impact and the monitoring, basically sewer movements, monitoring movements of Victorian. You have lots of Victorian sewers. You have lots of operational railways already. You have lots of assets. So that was the main focus, I believe.
So it's coming up the other side, which on the
which
two
was
sides,
onto the other
had
side.
to really watch it.
Yeah.
And I should remind you the Thames Tunnel was over budget and far too late in terms of delivery, which this isn't. So I think I'll wrap it up there. I'm sorry, there were one or two people who still had their hands up, but we've run out of time. So it just remains me to thank Khouloud for wonderful discourse and also for her contribution to a bit of London infrastructure, which we will be incredibly familiar with in a couple of years' time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.